trying to get your question answered. So just don't feel worried.
Yeah, that's perfect. Any questions? I'm here.
So, are we ready? You ready, Travis?
Yeah.
Okay, he's going to record it. That's okay with you, correct?
That's fine.
That means everybody in the room needs to know we're recording, but the way Travis is doing it is he's pinning her, so it will not record you guys' names or faces or anything for the students, just so you're all aware. If that's okay with everybody, give a thumbs up in the chat or say that's fine in the chat. We do need permission if we record. So in the chat, say that's okay. Somebody. Anybody. There we go. Okay, good. Sounds good. That's what we need to hear. Keep it coming. So, welcome everybody. Today I'm joined by Kalina, who is a former student of mine. I do have to share, I guess it was 2012. She was a student at Beachwood Middle School. She was new to the United States, which I had forgotten until we started chatting this morning, or at least to Cleveland, correct? Okay.
Correct.
And she proceeded to go through Beachwood, and we kept in touch while she was at Beachwood, and then had an ultimate decision to make her senior year between Brown and Edinburgh. Do you remember those discussions?
I remember that.
And she chose to go to Edinburgh, which is in Scotland. And I think that's kind of where I'll let her tell a little of her story. And kind of Edinburgh's very historically significant to the things we teach about the Middle Ages. One of the most famous castles in Europe is Edinburgh Castle. So we'll kind of turn it over, but I do have to point out, if you guys didn't see her interview with about the Decameron, which is about the Black Death in 7th grade, that's kind of her big legacy project. There are quite a few, but that was the one that still kids watch and see. She interviewed a PhD in California who had written about the Decameron, and her video is, I think, a testament to your work ethic and your efforts. So I'm real proud of you. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and she can just kind of tell her story. If you have questions, interject, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you for the very kind introduction. Actually, I have a question. I have some photos like you asked me to put together in a PowerPoint. Can I share that with the group?
Yeah, so at the bottom of the screen, if you go to, just move your cursor down, you'll get a white band, and it says Present Now. Click Present Now, okay. And you'll get entire screen. Click entire screen.
Okay.
Then you'll get a big white box with your screen. Click the screen in that white box, and then you will be presenting.
So like this?
I gotta go to a different scene and see if you are presenting.
It says you are presenting.
Yes, so if you go to your slideshow now, we will see it.
Okay.
All right, so your slideshow is now appearing for everyone. So
fabulous.
And as you're talking, they can just interrupt and we can talk a little bit, but you're more than welcome to go.
All right, great. So Mr. Holman gave a pretty comprehensive introduction of my time at Beachwood, and yes, I ultimately decided to go to the University of Edinburgh, which is in Edinburgh, Scotland, part of the UK. So this first slide that I have up here is a bird's eye view of Edinburgh and the Royal Mile. So at the top is the castle, and this big street that is in the photo is called the Royal Mile because there's the Edinburgh Castle at the top, and there's another castle about 1 mile down called Holyrood Castle, which is still the royal family's summer residence to this day. So there's 2 castles that are at the end of this street, which make it royal. And yeah, so I have lived here for the last almost 3 years. In Edinburgh, I actually used to live right below Edinburgh Castle. I could see it every day. And I study Chinese and history. I study a double degree at Edinburgh University. So this is part of my university. This is actually the School of Divinity. And most of the buildings that are part of Edinburgh University are these very old, very Middle Ages-like buildings. So this is Edinburgh Castle from the front. In case
like the gatehouse.
Pardon?
Is that the gatehouse then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the gatehouse. Cool. And it's up on a hill, correct?
Yeah. So it's actually on an extinct volcano.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's a royal castle, and all the way up until 1633, and then afterwards it was actually used as a prison. But then 49 people ended up escaping to the southern part of it. So then they decided to be functional as a prison. So now it's a tourist attraction. And I actually haven't been inside because it is supposedly bad luck for Edinburgh University students to go inside the castle prior to graduation. So there's that superstition that goes with the castle. But it's really beautiful. It's really, really high up, and you can see it pretty much from any point in Edinburgh. And then I don't know if any of you have watched the Da Vinci Code, but this is Rosslyn Chapel, which is a really, really old chapel that's still actually functioning. But the Da Vinci Code was filmed inside Rosslyn Chapel, which might be an interesting fact for students that may have watched the Da Vinci Code. And this is right outside of Edinburgh. So the good thing about living in such a historical city is that there's so much to do outside, really, really, really close outside of the city. And about 20 minutes out from Rosslyn Chapel is another palace known as Linlithgow, which is where the Scottish royals resided, and Mary Queen of Scots was actually born there.
So yeah, is that a rose window at the very top? Like if you move your cursor, do you have your cursor where you can see it? Is that a rose window in that top piece?
Here?
I guess I can't see where your cursor is, but yeah, it looks like a rose window, right? There are
yeah.
You got the spires pointing up. So Gothic architecture, the kids, at least in Beachwood, have seen these kind of images, so they're a little bit familiar. I don't think Dublin's got that far yet in their studies.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very reminiscent of what we studied about the Middle Ages in social studies back in my middle school days.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, yes. And even this building, this is our graduation hall. So this is hopefully where I will graduate next year. And it was built quite a while after Edinburgh Castle, obviously. But the good thing about Edinburgh is that anything new that's built kind of aims to retain this style and spirit of architecture. So everything kind of looks the same after a while. And then this is my university. We don't actually get to study here. Only law students get to study here, but this is what is on every page of the student prospectus when you're trying to make a decision where to go to university. And this is what I thought I was going into when I accepted my offer at Edinburgh. But yeah, that is pretty much where I live, where I have lived. I guess I could.
I see the Greek and Roman architecture in that, pediments and the column and the domes, so very Romanesque in some ways, that building.
So I guess I can leave it for some questions. I'm not really sure what the students are interested in hearing about my experience in Edinburgh.
Well, and you also, I told them you went to China and experienced a little difficulty there in your study abroad. So you might.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, I hate to say it, but they're probably more interested in that story than they are in the historical story.
Okay. That's fair enough. Yes, because I studied Chinese and history together, I had to go on an year abroad, which was this year, my junior year in university. So last August, I went to study in Beijing, which is the capital city of China, and I went to study at Peking University, which is one of the top universities in China. So I have some photos of that as well. Right there. So this bottom right photo is a photo of our campus in Beijing. And the right photo is me at the Great Wall of China, which I'm sure all of you guys have heard about. And the top photo is of the Summer Palace, which is a royal residence, again, for Chinese emperors in the past, and is now a tourist site. So I went to Beijing to study, and I was really, really apprehensive at the start, but I ended up absolutely loving it. And as Mr. Holman, there has been some difficulty because now I am back. We got recalled from Edinburgh University due to the coronavirus concerns. So I only actually got to experience half of my year abroad. But I ended up absolutely loving it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything that I could have ever gotten in Edinburgh, any sort of experience. Anna, yes, Edinburgh is in Scotland, to your question, and that's how it's spelled.
So you got flown back to, I've kind of kept up with you on Facebook. So you kind of got stuck in China, right? Trying to get back to Edinburgh?
Yeah, we weren't exactly stuck. So what happened was that after my semester, which ended all the way in January, mid-January, my friend and I went to travel around China for the holidays. And China has a very extended winter holiday that's based around Chinese New Year. So everyone goes home for about 6 weeks, of the students. So my friend and I made a route through China that would have taken us traveling for about 30 or 32 days, I think. So about a month. And halfway through that was when the virus started becoming a big deal. So about the end of January. And we were only halfway through our trip. We were in Chengdu, and everything just overnight closed, including our hotel. So there was a bunch of police people that came and said, okay, you got to get out of here. And my friend and I had to rush to find another hotel. And eventually museums closed, parks closed, everything closed, restaurants closed. And our only option was to find a flight back to Beijing, where we actually had a dorm and we were going to be safer in terms of having accommodation and knowing that we have somewhere to live and somewhere to go. So we weren't ever really stuck, but it was definitely an experience trying to get around at a time when everything around us was shutting down. And then a couple of days after that, we got notification from Edinburgh that we have to come back to our home countries as soon as possible. And I think about a week later, I flew out. But even by then, it was really hard to get a taxi on the street or anywhere really. Some of the taxi companies you would call and there was no signal. It was just, they were closed. Private cars weren't allowed on the street. So the company that runs what's sort of like Uber in China wasn't working either. So when I left for my plane, actually, it was quite difficult to make it to the airport. But it was fine. We found a way.
What you were in Chengdu, you said? So you were 250 miles from Wuhan?
Yeah. So actually, the day we landed in Chengdu, we walked past a plane of people directly from Wuhan. And at that point, we had heard that there was this virus going around and that it was maybe becoming a big deal in Wuhan. But we didn't have masks or anything. So we very much took it lightly. And we're just like, okay, guess we're walking past this plane. But yeah, Chengdu is quite close. And I think that's why everything shut down really quickly there, because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to spread as quickly in Chengdu.
So let me, I know Anna typed in the box about I think she used the word scared. I think she said were you scared while you were in China? At any point, did you get frightened over what was going on? And my question to piggyback on that was, did it feel like a military state? Did you see the police? How did it look if you were on the streets at that time?
Okay, I'll take those one at a time. Was I scared? Actually, no, not really. We felt very, very safe in China. And I think part of it was because we were on our vacation brains and it didn't seem as serious to us either. But also part of it was the measures that the government was taking were, I think, all designed to make us feel really safe. For example, when we went back to our dormitories, every single day when you come in and when you come out, you had to get your temperature checked and tell someone who was on duty constantly how you felt, whether you felt any symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. Every hour in the dormitories, they would disinfect everything. We couldn't, they closed everything in the university, so there was no canteens. We could only order food from restaurants, and we had to go to the main gate to pick it up. So they weren't letting anyone into our little dormitory campus that wasn't a student. And they checked our temperatures and checked for symptoms at the gate as well. So that's 2 checkpoints where you had to register your temperature and basically affirm that all was well. They gave us free masks every couple of days. They would come. They gave us free vitamin C. They still continued cleaning our rooms, coming in, just making sure we were okay. And overall, I think it was really, really well handled. The transportation as well, everything was sparkling clean, disinfected, checking temperatures everywhere. Everyone was really, really professional about following the measures that that the government was putting into place. And then to answer your question, Mr. Holman, it didn't really, I don't know if I can say that it felt like a military state. You could definitely see police around on the streets more, and they were more noticeable than usual, but there weren't more of them, in the sense that in China, usually everywhere you go, there's police, no matter what. There's cameras. There's about 6 cameras in every classroom to make sure the teachers are teaching what they should be teaching. There's police everywhere, in every metro car, on every metro entrance. If there's a big event happening or even a small event happening, there's police on all the bridges, because you cross a lot of streets in China by climbing on bridges and crossing over highways and stuff. So there's police on every corner of the bridge anyway. So it didn't feel like there were more of them. They were just a bit more visible because human and vehicle traffic was limited during the time. So you couldn't drive your private car if you had a car in Beijing for a really, really long time. And an hour and a half trip to the airport took 20 minutes when I was going, because there wasn't that traffic. So the police stood out, but it didn't seem like it was anything out of the ordinary at the same time.
Well, I hear you talking about the gates at the entrance to Beijing University and the check-ins and all that. That's actually a little reminiscent of like when we, again, I'm not comparing the Black Death directly to this because I think they're 2 different things, but the whole concept of quarantining. They were quarantining. Yeah. They were making sure that everybody was kept separate so that the infected didn't infect people that were not infected. So that's pretty interesting, that whole concept of how they were quarantining. And generally speaking, it sounds as though the Chinese people were much more aggressive in following government recommendations than is happening necessarily in the United States.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is discipline. Part of it is that Chinese people are very obedient to the state. And they weren't, the things that were put into place weren't recommendations. They were more like laws, and you will be punished if you don't follow them. But yeah, they were effectively quarantining us. And actually, I have a friend who is with a Bulgarian university, in China on a Chinese government scholarship, and she's still there. So she actually told me that after I left, the measures got even more aggressive. So while we could freely leave our complex before, about 2 days after I left, nobody could leave the complex. So students that were in had to stay in. Nobody could come out. They couldn't order food anymore. Everything had to be checked by police people who would check what kind of groceries you were buying from the supermarket online and bring them to you. So I think the quarantine measures got much, much more aggressive after I left, which probably also had an impact in that Beijing didn't get as affected as European and US cities, where you're right, the recommendations aren't being strictly followed.
So you got back to Edinburgh, and how long before they canceled everything there and you had to find somewhere else to go?
So my situation was a bit strange because I first flew back to Bulgaria because Edinburgh didn't really have a contingency plan in place for the people on a year abroad because they didn't expect us to be back. And I made plans to go to Edinburgh, and subsequently I found out that the classes that Edinburgh put in place for us were actually Chinese classes that I had already taken in Beijing. So it was a particular level that only I had taken from my course because it was a bit higher. And at that point, Edinburgh said that I could just go home and self-study and I didn't have to be there, which was really, really fortunate for me because I didn't have to find a place to live in Edinburgh and then think about moving out from there. But I think it took about 3 or 4 weeks. Our university shut down 2, 3 weeks ago. So everyone that I know from my course is also back home now. But obviously they had to do it in more urgent conditions than myself, because I just stayed for a week at the beginning of February in Edinburgh where there weren't really any confirmed cases then. And I went home and everything was fine. Nothing was in quarantine.
And you may not know the answer to this, what about American students? When Edinburgh closed, were they allowed to come back to the United States? Or were those, because I thought they stopped flights from Europe.
I'm not sure. I know that if people couldn't get home, they're allowed to stay in the dorms in Edinburgh. But I'm not sure if American students were allowed to go back.
Okay.
I would assume it depended on what flights were running. But I think the US said that US citizens can come back. So if they could find a flight, I'm sure they could return.
So how are things currently in Bulgaria?
They're okay. We've had I think 500 and something cases. We're also on some sort of lockdown, although it's not being very strictly enforced. But we can walk around in the streets. We can't congregate in parks or pedestrian zones. And theoretically, you shouldn't go out unless you need things like medicine or food. But I think with the nice weather that's been coming, that's been very lax. So you still see a lot of people out and about. But socially, it's been interesting because everyone kind of minds their own business now and tries to stay away from each other as much as possible.
How many people live in Bulgaria? What's the population there?
I think it's about 6 million total.
Yeah, so Ohio's about 12 total. And we have, I can't remember exactly. I want to say, I can't remember, but I thought we were in the thousands. And we've had very, very, that's all right, Jess. Thanks for joining us. You get that you have other stuff you have to do. We've had, everybody has been supposedly to shelter or stay at home for about 3 weeks. So our cases, Michigan and Ohio had the same number of cases the first day. And Ohio started locking down a little quicker than Michigan. Michigan is now the 4th highest in the country. And Ohio is 26th or 27th. So
Wow.
those closures are impacting. And Michigan has a smaller population than we do, and theirs is much higher. But we were having that same problem. People going to parks. It was 65 degrees yesterday. It was 70 degrees last week. People would go to the parks, and there was no way you could really social distance in those situations when you're on a trail and there's tons of people walking. So we've had similar things. Any other parts you want to talk about, or do you want me to kind of open it up and just have kids be able to? I think there's about 9 kids in here. We could just unmute them and have them ask questions. Or is there anything else you want to share?
I mean, that's fine. No, I was pretty active about going to China and living in Beijing, which is a city of 22 million, so 3 times the size of Bulgaria. But I ended up really, really loving it, and I got to travel around China a lot, and that's really opened my eyes about China and just about Western preconceptions of China that didn't turn out to be as true as the media might present.
Why don't you talk about that? What are some of those misconceptions of you being there versus what you learned in the United States growing up?
I mean, I think, first of all, the idea that China is in some way backwards, which I've seen quite a lot of people have that mentality, both in Europe and in the States. And you go there, and that's absolutely not the case. If anything, they're light years ahead in terms of infrastructure and everything. It's just amazing. I lived in Shenzhen for 6 weeks 2 summers ago, and it was just incredible. It's like you're walking into the future. And then also, obviously, because China is run by the Communist Party, there's a lot of stigma around that and what that means and what people may be lacking in terms of democratic freedoms and etc. And I think from interacting with the people, you actually realize that they aren't brainwashed by the Communist Party. They aren't this brainwashed group of people that blindly follows what their government tells them or blindly believes everything. And they're just people, and they get it, and they know that it's different in the West. But a lot of them don't miss what we may consider are freedoms that shouldn't be taken away from anyone. And they don't feel like that's lacking in their life, and they're not unsatisfied about it. And they're not trying to, a lot of them are very, very happy with the regime and with the way their lives are. And I don't think it's necessarily from a lack of knowledge. I think they're genuinely satisfied. So that was interesting.
You would have appreciated, we interviewed last week Diane Zabulski, who was a medievalist from Canada. And she talked a ton about the misconceptions of the Middle Ages. And you basically said the exact same thing she said. People are people. And, people live their life the best they can. And we look down upon people of different places or different areas. I mean, the gist of her message was that medieval people, they still loved, they had pets, they went about life, that everyday people are what the story of history is. It's not the story of the regime. It's of people. So I have to send you a clip of hers talking about that. I think you'll find it very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds great.
She was pretty interesting. So I don't know, Travis, Anna, anybody that's listening, you guys, you can turn your mics on, ask any questions you guys might have. I don't want to monopolize. Raghav, I know you put a question in the chat box. You might want to ask that directly to her if you'd like to. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, so why have they reopened the bat shops and all of those?
Where are you getting this news or information? Because I am not aware of this.
I don't know. I remember my friends telling me this before, school shut down.
So your friends were telling you that, the question, the way I thought I saw it in there was that, there's been some discussion that maybe this came from bats and crossed over to human population, and that came from the markets in Wuhan. Is that what you're kind of referencing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
those
go ahead.
markets have been shut down. And I haven't heard of them reopening. Actually, not much has reopened in China. Even outside of Wuhan and Hubei, but those wild markets specifically have been shut down permanently by the government. And I haven't read any news in China that they've reopened. So
for Raghav, you would just say straight up that that's probably a misleading information he's heard.
Okay.
most likely.
Anna, Travis?
No, I thought it was really interesting how you were talking about the preconceived notions that we, as people in the Western world, have of China. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I think for me, because the second half of my degree is history, and as a result of that, I have to write pieces of work on different topics. So we get to choose in our junior year what we want to write about, as long as it's about our country that we're in. So I've been working a lot with Orientalism for my essays, and I think once you delve into that notion that the West as colonizers constructed this idea of an other, and then from all that stem these preconceptions about different countries. So I actually wrote about the extent to which China can be considered an extension of the Orient, because the Orient didn't originally embody China as well. So I think from that, I started really being more conscious about it. And also, I was really open to China, but my mom came to visit me, and she had those preconceptions, and watching her experience something different and have them shattered really made me aware of them.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, when I was in college doing my master's, I did mine on basically how history books basically lied to us. So mine was this whole thing looking at, I think I looked at 27 different history books about how many people died from Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the bombs went off. And the numbers ranged from, I don't remember exactly, but it was like, 80,000 people to, 1.6 million people in each instance. It was unbelievable. And to say, so these notions of what's happening in the world are taught to us without us thinking about what's real. We just accept other people's versions of what history is. And, I'm so proud of you, because, I watched you as a seventh grader, and the things you were thinking about and the things you were doing. I'm overjoyed for you. I mean, it is just amazing to watch you and the things you're thinking about and the things we talked about, hopefully in seventh grade, to try to get you to think about different perspectives and the way the world is not always what it seems. And then to hear you say, hey, I'm kind of doing that in college, and I'm thinking about the world is pretty much overwhelming for me as a seventh grade social studies. So I'm certainly glad to hear these things.
So, Kalina, do you hope to go back to China once this is all passed?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it'll happen this year. So our exchange got canceled, and a couple of us really, really, really fought it hard to get it uncanceled. And then they said, okay, if it gets better, you guys can go back. But I don't think that's going to happen now, because China has banned all foreign entrance into there, because most of their new cases were imported from Europe. So I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I'm definitely considering applying for a master's there, or going back for an internship or something like that once I graduate. I can't do it this year because I still have my fourth year in Edinburgh to finish, but yeah, I definitely want to go back, and there's a lot of places I want to go to just to travel that I didn't get to experience this year. So for sure.
Do you keep in contact with anybody in China that you met or any friends that you have there currently?
Yeah, quite a lot of people actually. My classes were mostly international students, so I'm keeping in contact with some people from India and Egypt. And also my Chinese friends. I have quite a lot of Chinese friends. I have some Tibetan friends. So we stay in touch almost daily.
Do they like express, because in the United States, this stay at home kind of somewhat quarantine has everybody kind of feeling so restless, and they express boredom all the time and like, this is crazy. Do your friends from other countries, are they expressing like the same thing about this kind of stay at home quarantine policy? Like, are they out of their mind bored, or is this just more of a thing that Americans are struggling with?
Well, I think it goes back to there's still people. They still get bored, especially students. Their whole semester got kind of, torn apart. They can't finish what they're studying. They don't want to do online teaching. And actually, I don't know if you guys read, but there was an online teaching app, and so many Chinese students spammed it with 1-star reviews on the App Store that it got removed, so they couldn't use it anymore. So yeah, a lot of them are bored. There's been a lot of videos that are just people trying to deal with the boredom. I think the main difference is that they're okay with it, more, because at least here in Bulgaria, there's this very much this attitude of, oh, I'm stuck in the house. I need to get out. Why won't they let me go out? Whereas Chinese people are more like, oh, I should stay in. It's fine. I'm bored, but I'll get through it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the different mentality. But I think they're also bored. They also don't know what to do with themselves. They're also maybe fighting with their families and spending a bit too much time with each other.
That's
interesting. I think that's that perception of what you were talking about with beliefs, and Americans generally are looking at the world and saying, I have the freedom to do what I want. That's what this country founded on. You can't tell me to stay in.
Yeah.
I think there's a different take, like there are states that still have not done the stay-at-home order because they are saying it constitutionally they can't do that. They can't take the freedom of movement away from people. So there are these ideas of what it means to be an American and what it means to be a Chinese, which are different ideas. And so as a person, I think it would be, same thing in Europe. The Europeans have the Enlightenment and they had the revolutions and they had these things. So they see freedom as different, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, we were discussing with a friend how you could never have such a scale of quarantine in the States or in the UK as they did in China, because overnight in China, the streets emptied of cars. And you can never tell someone in the UK, don't drive your car today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you'd never revolt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the United States, it's mainly persuasion. They're trying to persuade you in your own best interest and in your
suggestions.
Family. Right. Versus this is the law. To my knowledge, nobody is being penalized in the United States. There's not citations. I heard there was the potential in New Rochelle in New York. They had a police quarantine around the city, a mile radius. People couldn't get in and out, but people moved freely inside the city. And I heard in Chicago there was talk about citing people, giving them tickets if they're out. But I don't know that anybody's done that yet, to my knowledge.
And they've implemented it here. There's a 5,000 lev fine if you're out in a park with people.
How much is 5,000 lev in America?
I don't know, actually. It's a lot.
It is a lot. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I appreciate your time. But, another thing, looking at your Facebook, you did a study. You must have been on one of your breaks at Edinburgh where you went to castles. You did like a castle tour.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we went to Linlithgow.
And didn't you do like a variety of castles? Didn't you do like for a week? You kind of
Oh, we just no. The first time we went to Linlithgow, which was a castle, and then the next time we went to Loch Lomond, so that was like more of a park. But I think we only did Linlithgow castle-wise.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, if you have some pictures, I don't know if you can share some of that stuff with me. I
Yeah,
might
for
have
sure.
some of those photos of the castles you've been to and the things you've, maybe you can add a couple more images of other things you've done in Europe, because I know that was a big draw for Edinburgh, was to be able to travel Europe.
Yeah, I've actually gotten to travel quite a lot. I went to Prague, I went to Spain, I went to Holland.
Yeah.
It's been nice. But yeah, I can for sure get some pictures, and I think I have some videos because I actually worked at Edinburgh University. I made some videos for their Instagram. So I think one of those has a lot of Linlithgow in it.
Okay.
I can try to find it as well.
I'll send you, an email and we can kind of chat. But I really do appreciate the time you took to chat with us. And
No need. I was happy to chat with you guys.
Well, it's been, again, I watch you and you're like real proud. That's all I can say. Real proud. So keep up the good work. And
Thank you.
I'm sure good things are ahead for you.
I hope so.
I think so. I think so. Anything else, Travis or Anna, before we let her go?
Nope, I don't think so.
Thank you for your time. What time is it where you are?
It is 6:15 p.m.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for meeting with us.
Pardon me, go ahead, Anna. I apologize.
I was saying thank you so much for meeting with us. It was really fascinating and inspiring to hear about your travels and everything.
Well, thank you for having me.